I got to say, New Amsterdam Radio is brought to you part by Anchor FM. Have you ever thought about making your own podcast? You see, when I was trying to get this podcast off the ground, I had a lot of questions. How do I record an episode? How do I get my show into all the apps people like to listen? How do I make money from my podcast? And most importantly, I don't want to deal with cables and wires and all those things. You see, the answer to every single one of these questions is pretty simple. Anchor. Anchor is the one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing your podcast. And best of all, it's 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And you can use your phone, which is pretty awesome. Now, Anchor can match you with great sponsors who want to advertise on your podcast. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's what I'm doing right now by reading this ad. So if you ever wanted to start a podcast and make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start. That's anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. That's anchor.fm/start. I can't wait to hear your podcast. New Amsterdam Radio starts now. Hello, everyone. My name is Flobo, boys, of course, and I'm your captain, your pilot on this crazy journey through the city of creatives, New Amsterdam. It's August. We're trying, we're attempting, but we are navigating through 2020 for all its challenges, and it's good stuff too. I can't lie to you. I feel like even though it's been incredibly difficult in 2020, there are some good things that are happening. I just want to say, of course, thank you so much for checking out this episode and all the other episodes of New Amsterdam Radio. Tell a friend about the show. I don't know if you guys are on the Patreon, patreon.com/FloboBoys, but this is the official announcement. New Amsterdam is in a new chapter of sorts, updated logo, refreshed identity for the brand, for the show, and all of that. But also, speaking of Patreon, and that's patreon.com/FloboBoys, the extended interview with my guest today has to be the longest I've ever done. 80 minutes of just pure, unfiltered chat with Christian Bladt, who is on the show today. Christian and I are both hosts, but he does it way better than this guy. Learned a lot from him. I always say that when I see him about the technique, or I could say the mechanics of hosting. And he's also a Mets fan, so he can't be all that bad. We talk about a lot of things happening in the world, a lot of things about how you can start a journey and roll the dice and have it pay dividends. So without further ado, let's give it up for Christian Bladt. Welcome back to New Amsterdam. It's Flobo, and countless episodes are going, but I actually have one of the biggest guests of all time, the man that taught me how to do everything there is about hosting, about presence, about being a proud New Yorker-ish. Give it up for the man, Christian Bladt from the Blattcast. How are you doing today, sir?
You know what? If I can do anything to contribute to new content every week, every night, every hour, I am honored to be able to help it. And I'm getting way too much credit. I think that if someone who is a lesser host than Flobo could point to me for having led them down the road. But I appreciate all the nice things you say. We've always had so much fun doing shows together.
Wow.
Over at AfterBuzz, and I don't know if we ever did anything at Popcorn Talk.
One anatomy movie, Annie Hall. We did Annie Hall together.
Oh yeah, we did do Annie Hall, which was great. I was glad we watched that together. That's right. Yeah. So, but yeah, no, we've always had fun, and we've done great shows, and shows that were okay, like Chambers.
We'll get to that for sure.
All right.
I want to say that this is how much influence you have on me, though, because I used to post at Flobito.com whenever. And it was only one time I had a video where I said my website a bunch of times, and you're like, do you do new content every week? And I was like, I think I do. And so from that point on, every Wednesday I posted something because I told Christian at AfterBuzz and his new content every week. So thank you.
I learned that early on from our guru over at AfterBuzz, Kevin Undergaro, just the idea of, if you're going to be there. If you want to do every week, just set that tone from the beginning. If you're going to do every 2 weeks, you're going to do something to just make sure it's always there when it's supposed to be. So when people are starting out, the first thing I always say is like, great, do 4 or 5 of them. And then you're probably the one that you think is going to be your first one is not going to be your first one. I would never throw a show away because maybe it wasn't one of your best. I mean, I've done 394 episodes of the Blackcast. So,
and my favorite is episode 368, the one I'm on.
Episode 368 is a good one. My variation of my joke is usually we've done 394 episodes and 6 of them are good. You just have to figure out which ones they are. But just the idea of consistently, bringing it to people. And because I found with my podcast, the Blackcast, and yes, that's spelled BLADTCAST, that when it started, there were a lot of streams, a lot of downloads. And I was like, well, I wanted to keep being there every week. So that was when it started, it branched out. It was always me and these guys I used to work with. Yeah. And now sometimes it'll just be interviews. It'll be other friends that I have from other shows or whatever. And I think that that's probably what hurts the Blackcast is that it's a little bit of everything. And I always say that the Blackcast isn't for everybody, but for everybody, there is an episode of the Blackcast.
That is good marketing right there. How long did it take you to get 390 episodes?
How long did it take? It's been 7 years. So
wow.
And there's a couple of breaks in there from when the radio show I worked for went off the air, as they say. And I took paternity leave at one point. And but then also it's like I'll do a bunch of episodes together, like, in the early days of quarantine. I would do like 3 or 4 in a week sometimes.
Yeah.
So I try, and I try not to be too crazy with it. I try not to post too many of them. I try not to make them too long, but that always gets that never works.
Right.
I've done ones that are shockingly close to 3 hours.
Whoa.
And I'm like, I feel like these are getting too long. And people are like, no, we want to be longer. I'm like, all right, you're going to get that. And so I think it topped out at 2 hours and 55 minutes. So apparently after 7 years, I think I'm Joe Rogan, but Rogan can get away with doing 3 hours. I don't do it. I don't do it often. It was like for episode 350 or 300 or something. I'm
gonna give you a little slice of Joe Rogan. That's pretty noble of you. Yeah.
So anyway, but that's the long rambling answer of just consistently posting it so that people know, like, oh, it's Wednesday. I'm gonna, if people are subscribed, they know to look for it. They're going to look for it if they get the audio version, maybe they look for it at Apple Podcasts. They go to the YouTube page because they get the reminder that there's a new episode. But consistency is key.
What brought you out here, man? Was it broadcasting, and is that the dream?
I don't know what the dream is anymore, but I'll tell you what the dream was. I'll tell you what the dream was that brought me here. So I grew up in New York in the rural suburbs, and I went to Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York. Red Foxes, what up? And
no one says that. No one
literally no one said that. No one does that. Rick Smits played for the Red Foxes, and that's like,
I didn't know that.
My joke would always be Rick Smits played there. Bill O'Reilly went there for undergrad, so I would say that I was the third most famous person from Marist College. It's probably not true because when you factor in regional news anchors, like, oh, he does a 6 o'clock in Albany. Well, that guy's bigger than me. It's just,
he doesn't have a black cast, so I don't know.
No, he does not. But I knew I'd gotten the advice early on that the thing to do was intern when you're in college because those connections are going to be really important. So I set it up so that I interned my entire senior year of college. In the fall, I interned at Late Night with Conan O'Brien. In the spring, I interned at Saturday Night Live. So those were really good. And SNL is where I always thought that I wanted to work and would have loved that opportunity had it ever presented itself. But after I got out of college, I was a page at NBC. And I met a ton of people through that. People that I don't know. I mean, I could point to a lot of different people, but one of them is the executive producer of Impractical Jokers. So I mean, I think he co-created it with those guys. Simi Kostanowitz, yeah, that's right. I just gave him a shout out. So somewhere somebody's going to tweet him, "Hey, I heard your name mentioned." It's going to be one of
NYAF.
Kostanowitz. He's a Mets fan too, by the way.
Yeah, let's go Mets.
Yeah. But so and I just got to know these people, and so this is like the early 2000s. There were opportunities in New York, but I essentially wanted to write, and no one told me when I was younger that you need to go to Harvard to become a comedy writer. No one had told me that you need to be super smart to go to Harvard, and I was not super smart. So I was not going to be a comedy writer. It was just sort of those old math like proofs, like if P then Q.
Right.
P was me being smart, so then it was not Q that I was going to be a comedy writer. So it just wasn't going to happen. So, I got to the year 2003, and a good friend of mine who I started a website with, made a few short films with, my friend Tim Sicardo, who wrote a few episodes of Community. He worked on that show Vice Principals that Danny McBride did, and he's been working on American Dad for a while. He was definitely moving out to LA, and it just seemed like, this is the time to move. I could move with somebody. I'll have a roommate. At least, I knew a smattering of people. We both worked on Law and Order shows in New York. I worked on SVU, and he worked on Criminal Intent. And we just were like, I think this might be it. This is what we can get out of New York. And so I moved out to LA, and within almost 6 months, this was the best job that I could get on the show was as a production assistant, but I was hired on Dennis Miller's CNBC show. So I started working there, and it was a fairly laid back environment. And I got that job because I was an NBC page, and I had the contact info for the line producer and one of the other producers because they had been pages in LA. Pages in New York, we look down on pages in LA because they don't have that much to do. We had a lot to do, and there's a lot of it's a little bit more
East Coast West Coast beef in Pageland.
Definitely, yeah.
What?
Definitely. Yeah. Because Biggie had a lot to do at 30 Rock. All right, where Snoop, it just wasn't as much.
Right, of course.
Yeah. But so I got hired as a production assistant, and I did that sort of level of work. I would pick up it's a sort of an old media thing. I'd pick up all the newspapers, the physical newspapers and magazines every morning. I'd go to the newsstand. I would, pick up breakfast. I would run around and do errands and stuff. But one of the writers was like, "Oh, you want to write jokes? Just give me some jokes every day, and I'll submit some of the best ones." So I would give jokes to this guy, Jim Hanna, one of the funniest guys that I've ever met. And he would put them into the mix. And it's a very judicious system, what Dennis Miller does when it comes to joke submissions. Okay. Is he gets a packet with like 300 jokes. Every joke has a number. He needs to pick however many. So he calls in and he says all the numbers. He doesn't know who wrote anything. He doesn't care. He doesn't want to know. At SNL, you write jokes. It's got your name at the top of it. So they're like, "Oh, well, we got to pay this person if we use that joke." And I sold one joke to SNL and all the time that I was there. So one joke to Colin Quinn. Colin Quinn, who was also great.
That seems on brand for you, though.
Yeah, well, Colin Quinn would, every time he'd run into, because he knew my name, because my name was at the top of the joke submissions. And so he would always look, because he was doing Weekend Update at the time. So he was always like, "This is what we need jokes about, give me some of this." When I was an intern at SNL was when the Lewinsky story broke. So, yeah. So, I probably have like 800 knee pad jokes somewhere, if I could dig them out somewhere in these files.
Timely.
Yeah, not really anymore. A lot of jokes you can't do anything with. The joke I sold, I couldn't even tell anymore.
Oh, yeah. Standards change.
It has a word for mentally challenged people that we don't use anymore.
Fair.
But It actually, the joke was making fun of Jerry Lewis, but it used that word. It used that R word. So it's like when I tell the joke, I always have to do all this ramp up. But anyway, so I had written a lot of monologue jokes in just a few years, like submitting to SNL. So I felt like I still feel like that's what my best talent is. There's very little call for that talent, unfortunately, of monologue writers, because people don't do monologues the way Johnny Carson did. They don't do them the way that Jay Leno did. Jay Leno would do like an 11-minute monologue, and he had a lot of writers because of it. So I would write these jokes and I would give them to this guy, Jim Hanna. And sometimes Dennis would pick my joke and sometimes they got on the air. And that was great. So then it got so that I could write more jokes. And I started turning in just as many jokes as the other writers. As the actual writers. And so I would find time to write the jokes. And, so some days you had a couple hours to do it. Some days I would write like 40 jokes. And to be honest, it's like 5 of them has the same setup. And then another 5 have the same setup. So it's really just different tags, but still. And then one of the writers, another really funny guy that I love, this guy, Bob Oshak, started writing me in. You know Oshak?
He was a crowd warm up for the Late Show with Craig Ferguson. I saw him live.
He did. Because he was a writer there. He did the warm up for Dennis Miller's CNBC show. That was the first warm up that he did, and he would write me into a lot of bits. And the Dennis Miller was impressed at how little I cared about the bits, about how I wasn't super prepared or polished or even necessarily very good.
Right.
It was like I would play I had a recurring character of Dennis Miller's no good teenage son, Dak. And I had a really bad wig that I would wear. I had a catchphrase that I actually don't think I remember. Yeah, I don't quite remember what it was, but it was just like, oh, Dad, you don't understand. It was like that.
Yeah.
It was that level, and it was always so bad. And we would have these interactions like during the monologue portion of the show. Oh. And it was, and so Dennis Miller got to know who I was because I would do these bad bits. And one of the things that, I don't know where I learned this. I think I learned this in college from a broadcasting producer, who was a professor there, this guy, Doug Cole, who had worked in media forever. You don't say no. If they write you in a bit, you don't say, oh, no, I don't want to do that, because they'll find somebody else. And I might have learned that. I think I learned that as an intern, actually. I think I learned that from some of the Conan writers. It was like, yeah, if you're going to be, if they want you to be in something, do it. And so I never said no. So I did some of the most ridiculous things. I was an astronaut with a helmet that was too big. I wore ladies' lingerie. Whatever they said, I was like, yep, I'm there. And I have all these clips, and but it was for CNBC, and that's that's what Comcast, Universal, whatever that company is, and they take everything down off of YouTube. I could put that stuff up, but it's a little self-serving. So anyway,
go for your OnlyFans account.
Yeah, exactly. Except in my case, it's my only fan.
One relative. That's all. Wow.
So within a few months, I started working for Dennis Miller, and my sort of like, there's this famous clip of Madonna on American Bandstand, and she and I basically have the same career, so that's why I'm using it. No, but there's this moment where Dick Clark asked her, like, it's very famous. It's like, oh, what do you want to do? I want to rule the world. And arguably she did at one point, she's lingered around a little too long. But so if you asked me in a moment, like, well, what do you want to do? I wanted to be Dennis Miller. I wanted to do Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live, because when I was a kid in middle school, that's what I was like, oh my God, this guy's the coolest. Yeah, I want to be him. And that's the example I use to anybody, whether, when people have made the mistake and let me speak to a class full of college children,
it's happened multiple times.
I will give that. It has. I will give them advice, which is just always manage your expectations for what it is that you want. And what I thought I wanted was to, be on SNL, and I wanted to be Dennis Miller. But I got the chance to write for him. I got the chance to work for him. And I've worked with him for most of the last 16 years. There's a few stretches between shows and time where basically if he's had a show, I've usually worked on it since 2004, because he just sort of I don't know, he's not that difficult to work with, but it's very specific. It's like,
sure,
give him this, don't do that, don't do this. And I tried to explain it to someone once, and when his radio show started, I was his assistant, but I would also write jokes. And there was a producer based in New York, and he had done other shows with non-comedians, but because Dennis was doing the show out of his house, just the idea was that, this guy has done shows with remote hosts, which now like every show is that way. But this was, in 2007, it's still that wasn't
a big deal, yeah.
It was. And it's just, I gave him some pointers. I'm like, yeah, do this, don't do that. Don't do this thing. Don't do this thing. And then everything's going to be fine. We didn't listen to anything that I told him. And after 3 months, they looked to replace him. And Dennis Miller, to his credit, was just like, do you want to produce the radio show? If that guy could do it, clearly you can do it.
Right.
And while the people at the company didn't say it like that, what they said was, look, we can teach you how to be a radio producer. And having been a radio producer, yeah, it's not that hard. I could teach. I could teach most woodland creatures how to be radio producers.
The ones that are hanging around in Los Angeles, yes.
Yeah, just not squirrels. But the
yeah, of course.
They don't have the attention span. The squirrels, though, you could teach how to be producers for Quibi.
Oh, yeah. Short form content. That joke has layers. I like that.
But so, and just the idea was like, we could roll the dice and see if there's chemistry for another producer with Dennis, but we already have that. That's the more important thing. So yeah. So I actually had to think about it for a second. I'm like, wait, I wanted to be a writer, but then I realized I'm like, yeah, but I'm really working with him. I'm still writing jokes. I'm sort of writing, research and suggested questions for him. I was writing jokes for him. Within a couple years, I was co-hosting the show with him, and then that led to the Blackcast. So by moving to LA, not only did I meet the guy who I thought was the funniest comedian, and I still think that it's one of the sharpest comedy minds that we've had in my lifetime. And so not only did I work with him and continue to work with him, I met my wife on that show, the CNBC show. She was an intern on that show. Mm-hmm. And I was a production assistant. And I always made the point that she had a better job than I did, except that I got paid.
I just want to say, man, thanks for coming out to New Amsterdam Radio. Here's where you officially put yourself over. Tell the world where they can find you and all your content online. Good sir.
So if you've liked any of what you've heard in this conversation, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. And that'll lead you to all the other things that I do. I have the Blackcast, which is the podcast that I've been doing for 7 years. I referenced it earlier. BLADTCAST.com. I believe episode 393 will be up in the morning. So, wow. But people won't see this for a week, so whatever. Episode 395 by then, who knows? But anyway, and my YouTube channel, the Blackcast YouTube channel, spelled the same way, BLADTCAST. That is where you find not just that show, but you'll also find some interviews that I do for the show. And you will find right now the temporary home of some of the shows that I've done for AfterBuzz TV, including Marvel Movie News, which we like to call Marvel Movie Talk these days. Like to respect the intellectual property that came before me.
But then
we have the Trump Report, which I co-created, and Kevin Undergaro came up with that name, but I lay claim to that. And we were having so much fun doing the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. after show with Tehran and Katie. I don't know how to say her last name. Kawamoto, I think. And Rachel, who you and I did
Radner these days, correct?
Rachel Radner Goodman Radner, author.
Okay. Yeah.
She's all those things. But so we're doing the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. after show on my YouTube channel. So people who are fans of that show. And look, the series finale is just a few weeks away. And, after I was going on hiatus for the summer, I was like, well, when you come back, the show's over. So I'm just like, great, let's just keep it going. Everybody wanted to keep it going. So we did. And we get a fraction of the audience we got, but we still have fun with the people who do show up for the chat.
Yeah.
So you can find those shows all at the Blackcast YouTube channel, and I will spell it again, BLADTCIST. But I'm at Christian DMZ on Twitter and Instagram. And much like Flobito, you can find new content every week.
Once again, thank you so much to the purveyor of the Blackcast, Christian Bladt, for being on the show. You can follow him over on social media at Christian DMZ, as he mentioned. And if you come across the Blackcast episode 368, that's the one featuring me. So therefore, it's my favorite episode by default. You can follow me over at Flobo Boys on Twitter, at Flobito on Instagram, and of course, Flobito.com. The Patreon is patreon.com/FloboBoys. To see all the interviews we have on New Amsterdam, they are on the Patreon, complete and unabridged. Like I said, Christian and I, we talked for over an hour about all things fun. If you haven't checked it out already, patreon.com/FloboBoys. Become a patron, support the arts, and support the homie. Next week, we have a very special guest on New Amsterdam Radio, the first ever two-time guest, Dr. Courtney Beasley. I catch up with her as she tells me how the launch of her brand and website, Put in Black, is doing. So I can't wait for that. I want you guys back here for that. But until next time, you guys are all citizens are the city for creatives, New Amsterdam. So until next time, the city is yours.